Honorable Finance Minister, DawnMedia Group, Population Council, development partners and colleagues. I want to kind of make 2 points. First of all, before I start, I want to acknowledge a very important change that I've seen in the macro discourse, which is largely coming from the Finance Minister, which is about putting population first in terms of thinking about the economy. And I think one of the important things about this panel was that we really dig deeper into how the two connect. So I have 2 simple messages. One is for the Finance Minister. That don't think about population only as a separate service to be provided in terms of the PSDP, but we want to center that as part of growth. If you don't bring the population down, you're not going to get growth up. And I'm going to build, it's a bit unfortunate, but Hanid showed a couple of things that I wanted to show, but the link between population and growth is really important. The second thing is, both in terms of growth and in terms of fertility decline, I completely agree with Akbar that if you don't center women, you're not going to get growth up and you're not going to get fertility down. But what I'm going to try and do is show you some evidence why I'm saying this. But there's a third thing. While I'm completely committed to the agenda of focusing on CPRs and pushing family planning, equivalently, if we can't change the structure of the economy, that's not going to create the necessary demand for fertility changes that you need. So I'm going to run through the presentation quickly, partly because Hanid has shown most of it. So I seem like the imposter who's sort of leveraging off things that are shown. But I'm going to add, and that'll make the conversation more focused. Can we go to the second slide? Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a graph you've already seen from Hanid. The left graph shows you the divergence in GDP. I call this the 2 big divergences, and these are from our regional peers, which is Bangladesh and India. The growth rate of Pakistan is clearly diverged. The only important thing to add to what Hanid was saying is that if you look at 1980, Pakistan's GDP per capita was quite high relative to India and Bangladesh. And that is for 2 reasons. We got a colonial endowment, which was huge, much better than both many parts of India and Bangladesh, but also the growth that Pakistan experienced in the 60s put us ahead. But the second big divergence, which is that in the fertility rates, and you can see the top line, which is the right graph, is Pakistan. Then the middle line is Bangladesh, and the bottom line is India. So this starts at 1980. India's fertility rates were already far lower than Pakistan's. But, and this is the important point, Bangladesh was quite close to Pakistan. But if you look at between 1980 and 1990, Bangladesh's fertility rate actually converges with India, which shows you what the opportunities are in terms of rapid decline that can be actually achieved. But from Pakistan's point of view, we've had a delayed demographic transition. And that's, I think, at the root cause of it. We started with a big population, but the rate at which fertility is declining is just not sufficient enough to create the preconditions for growth. Can we go to the next slide, please? We keep mentioning this figure that Pakistan is now the 5th most populous countries in the world. What this figure shows is it's a plot of fertility levels given by children per women, which is on the horizontal axis, versus population growth. The shocking bit, and this is what the message I want you to take back, not only are we the 5th most populous country in the world, but amongst the populous countries, we have one of the highest rates of growth of population. That's the challenge. So we're very big, and we continue to grow fast. Many other countries that are big in terms of population, their population growth is now coming down to 1% or below, whereas we're big and we continue to grow fast in terms of population growth, and that is really the challenge. Next slide, please. Hanid has already shown this. The big question is, with high fertility rates comes an age dependency ratio, which is what the left graph is showing. Pakistan is the top line, which has a much higher age dependency ratio now relative to Bangladesh and India. So for every 100 working citizens in Pakistan, there are 70 or 72 dependents. When you look at India and Bangladesh, that's come down to around 50. Now, why does that matter? It's very simple. Think about two households. One has 8 children, one has 2, and they have exactly the same income. The households with 8 kids are going to have very low savings, and the households with 2 kids are going to have much higher savings. So they're going to be able to invest more or generate those savings for the economy. And that's the difference between India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, that our age dependency is high, so that impacts the saving rate, as Hanid pointed out. The right figure is just showing the net saving per capita, and you can see the big difference between India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Next slide, please, which translates into an investment gap between these countries that Hanid has also talked about. But the important thing is, how does it, or what's the knock-on effect on growth? And there is a nice study by the economist Asim Hussain, who used to be at the IMF, who basically it builds on work that he did in the 90s, but he's updated these figures, and it shows that basically the age dependency ratio explains about half to 2/3 of the gap in the gross domestic saving rates between Pakistan and India and Bangladesh. So our GDS is about 6.3%, and in Bangladesh and India it's over 20%. So even if half of that gap is accounted by because of demographics, that means bringing demographics down can give you a boost of about 2% in 2 percentage point growth in terms of GDP, which is quite large. So there's a direct connection between population savings and growth, and therefore population needs to be centered as part of the growth agenda. The second channel, if you can go to the next slide, is basically the low female labor force participation rate. The big story over here is Pakistan, which is the red dot over there on the left graph, has one of the lowest female participation rates in its income cohort. So the bar is showing female labor force participation rates in countries with a GDP per capita of between 4,000 and 8,000, which is where Pakistan is. And you can see that our red dot is below the bar, so we're at the bottom end of the female labor force participation. Why is that the case? One simple reason is that care burden in households is really high. So if you look at the demographic survey and you talk to women about why they don't want to go and work, that's kind of something shown on the red bars on the right graph, they basically say that they have too much domestic work to do. So you're not going to get female labor force participation up till you can get the care burden down. And again, getting the care burden down requires sort of population measures, which will then release the labor force, which can boost growth. Can we go to the next slide? The second big reason why female labor force participation rates go down is basically because of fertility behavior. So again, if you look at the demographic surveys and you look at pregnancies and what percentage of pregnancies in different countries are associated with high-risk behavior, i.e. behavior that's going to put maternal health at risk for a whole host of reasons, the percentage in Pakistan is over 50%. Now in India and Bangladesh, that's gone down to about 30%. So again, the health of women impacts essentially both the labor force participation rate, but it is coming because of sort of frequency of pregnancies and challenges related to maternal and fertility behavior. And that's another reason why population programming becomes central to growth, but also to women's health. The next slide, please. The World Bank, in a very nice report, which I like, which is called Swimming in Sand, I don't know how you swim in sand, but you do, basically calculated the effect increasing the female labor force participation rate can have on growth. And depending on different assumptions, the projected growth is between 5 to 23%. So that's a pretty high dividend that growth can get if you can get female labor force participation up. And as I've shown you, getting fertility down is a way to unleash it. So we need to start to make these connections. But there are two factors that I want to turn to. If you could go to the next slide, please. Which is really about factors that are impacting both growth and fertility. Yeah, I can finish if they can switch the slides. Okay, can you get them to the next slide, please? Okay. No, it's the previous one. Okay, yeah. The first thing is that sort of mobility barriers for women are a big reason why fertility remains high and female labor force participation remains low. So the map, this is again from the same World Bank report, actually shows you a rating of different districts in terms of restricted access to public transport, which is the main form of transport that women can use because they don't ride around in motorbikes like men do. So the access to public transport becomes a huge thing. So if you look at restricted access becomes high, and you can see the map is largely red. And two things happen when you don't give women access to not only public transport, but public transport that is safe, is that the cost of becoming employed goes up. When the cost of becoming employed goes up, women are going to stay at home. So female labor force participation gets that bump. But actually the opportunity cost of providing care work inside the family drops. And that means families can now afford to have more kids because they have care time available in the form of mothers who are not working. So if you really want to transform the agenda of both growth and women's participation in the economy, then making or centering public investment in safe transport for women that can reduce mobility barriers would be central. And I think these should be a central agenda of provincial planning departments, maybe funded or co-funded by the federal government. We can skip this slide. If you can go to the last slide. So the last big divergence is that Pakistan is the economic structure of Pakistan. So this is basically showing you a share of GDP that goes into agriculture. And you can see that both India and Pakistan, the share of GDP in agriculture has fallen very, very fast. In Pakistan, that structural change is happening at a much slower pace. If I put the equivalent graph for employment, what you're going to see is that the bulk of jobs in Pakistan are basically jobs related to agriculture or low productivity services. But these are not modern jobs that increase the returns to skill. Now, this is crucially important for fertility because as returns to skills go up, people or families start to actually value the quality of kids as opposed to the quantity of kids because now there is a demand for education and there is now the ability to invest in education. So with the structure of the economy as it is, the returns on skills are very low. My friend, who's also a relative of Finance Minister Faisal Bari, keeps saying that the question isn't why you have so many kids out of school. The question is, why do you have so many kids in school, given that the returns of skills are not that high, because that's simply the nature of the demand of the economy. Added to that is the right graph, which just plots the average learning adjusted years of schooling. And as you can see, Pakistan has one of the lowest levels, and that basically tells you the supply of schooling is not boosting learning. So unless the growth strategy can start to create sectors where the returns to skills actually go up, you're never going, I mean, if I was a family, I would much rather have 2 more kids than have fewer kids and give them education, because I just don't see the return between those 2 activities squaring. So finally, how do we bring this together? The first thing is population has to be part of the growth agenda. You're doing absolutely the right thing, but center it into your growth agenda. The second thing is, when we think about fertility, we have to think about the framework as an integrated framework that centers basically women's reproductive health and safety in terms of mobility. It centers basically both structural change in the economy, and it centers essentially family planning. All these 3 things have to come together in a strategic agenda around a population that combines finance, planning, and sort of health. And unless you can bring these 3 things together, you can't pivot. The last point, and it relates to this slide. We're all sort of so optimistic about the digital economy and AI, as I am, but the digital economy and its future brings with it a huge challenge of destroying jobs. So if the jobs that start to get destroyed are precisely the jobs where skills are, then actually the returns to skills are actually going to go down. And as the returns to skill go down, you're not going to have a fertility reduction from moving in that direction. You're actually going to move in the opposite direction. That's not to say that AI, blockchain, and the digital economy cannot be used as a pivot, but we have to have a very clear strategy about it. And that strategy has to tie the digital economy to jobs, not to growth, but to jobs. And I think there's a difference between it. You can have a digital economy that grows very fast but creates a jobless growth, or you can have a digital economy that amplifies labor productivity, increases the returns to skills, and then it'll be a funnel for not only growth but also for fertility reduction. So as part of this agenda and the growth agenda, you have to have a digital plan which amplifies jobs, not growth. Thank you.